You have to know that there's a God Almighty that's creating you at every single instant, lovingly, intentionally. And you are better, and you're called to a higher purpose than in the deception and anti-God and anti-Torah and anti-humanity activities that you're currently participating in. So act accordingly. Refuse to participate. That's what God Almighty is calling to you. Your calculation is not to decide what difference is it going to make whether or not you participate in the activities of Amalek. How does it make a difference if one person doesn't participate? Well, the answer is it makes a difference. Because it makes a difference because you were created not to do this. You were created to make this decision not to participate in these terribly, terribly anti-God and anti-emes, anti-truth and anti-Torah and anti the Jewish people and anti the children of Israel, anti the entire humanity activities. So your job, this is what you're put in the world to do, to say no to this. And let your superiors figure out what to do. And maybe you'll trigger some of them who also will see your courage and they'll realize that they too should defect. And even though they might tell you in those places that you work that there's nowhere to defect to because they've infiltrated every single organization and every single counterintelligence agency in the world, and it may be true. But you're not defecting to the West, or you're not defecting to the FBI or any of the CIA or any of these places. You're defecting to God Almighty. You're returning to who you really are. That's what your choice is. That's why you're here in this world. That's why you're watching this video. And your job is to defect to God Almighty right where you are. You don't have to, if you can escape to a place that's physically safer, then God should bless you and you should be successful. But that's not the calculation. The calculation is defect right where you are, back to who your home, which is with God Almighty, who's creating you at this moment in this time. So this is your responsibility. This is why you're created. So it makes a difference. It makes a difference for the purpose of your existence. Even if I will never know of it, and maybe no one else will know of it. In this current iteration of reality, but God Almighty knows of it and is creating you with that hope and that prayer and that intention that you'll make that choice. And when you do that, you will have an effect on other people around you. And that's up to God Almighty as to how fast and how far that spreads. And God willing, you should be an inspiration to the people. But enough is enough. The Torah teaches us not to accept the reality is that this is the way it has to be. It doesn't have to be that you have to get up in the morning to go and participate in a conspiracy against humanity and a conspiracy to deceive people and to create phony dialectics and do your part to read the scripts and write the scripts and program the scripts and do the bots and to go and try to entrap people into sending you messages and to try to create imagery and images and fake this and fake that. That's not what you're created to do. You don't have to do that. We can disassemble that entire phony dialectic, that entire phony reality right now. And that's what God Almighty's intention is. And that's why the redemption is so close. Because it's only a matter of people recognizing this. And then it disappears. Like the Lubavitch Rebbe says again and again, that the people who right now are the most objecting to what I'm saying right now will become the biggest proponents of it, because it is the greatest liberation for them. A person who's busy working in the midst of these type of agencies that are the agencies we're referring to, where they're busy promoting deception and despair and demoralization and subversion against humanity, they're in the greatest exile of all. They may have a sense of that they feel secure because for today they haven't been executed by their superiors or purged in some sort of purge that's coming. But that's not what the sign of security is. Scientific security is, are you aligned with God Almighty? Are you aligned with your Creator? Even if, as we learned, we're coming up to the redemption of the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, that he was willing to give up his life at the hands of the communists. The Soviet terrorists were intending to, God forbid, do the opposite of life to him. And he did not affect him whatsoever, their threats. And he remained tranquil to the entire time. He's an example for every single human being. His story needs to be heard by every single human being. That we're not afraid of any other human being, because we're created by God Almighty in his divine image. So what is there to be afraid of? What could another human being possibly do to me, says King David. So that's the example we're meant to follow. That's the inspiration of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak, that he was not in any way impacted, even though he was physically tortured and suffered the rest of his life physically for the consequences of that, and came close to not continuing in this physical world. That in no way impacted him. And in fact, upon his release from the prison where he was supposed to be, it was intended for him to have a sentence opposite of life, and he was released to exile, the first thing he did in Soviet exile was to do the very things that he was in prison for. He sent people to make a mikveh, a ritual bath, according to the Torah, and he sent people to increase into teaching Jewish children that the Aleph base, that they should know the holy tongue with which the world is created at every instant. And he continued to teach Chassidus, and he continued to teach the Chassidim. And as soon as he had Chassidus, as he continued and increased in his activities, and he had Chassidus translated into the other languages so that the non-Jews should learn about the oneness of God Almighty, that there's nothing besides God Almighty. And then he inspired his son-in-law to increase all these activities on an ever-increasing scale. So this is what should draw us, every single human being. And so the Rebbe says that those people who are currently entwined in their stuck thinking and working for forces that are fighting against God Almighty, working for Amalek and all its manifestations, and working to entrap human beings into immoral thinking and immoral thoughts and images and speech and action, and confusion and warfare, and confusion and terrorism, and confusion in health matters. All these people will become, when they're going to recognize that there is a God Almighty, and that they right now can make that choice to be aligned, make actions and say things and take actions that are completely in line with God Almighty's creation, and they will become the biggest proponents of God Almighty. They'll become the biggest proponents of Torah. They'll become the greatest allies of the children of Israel, and recognize that it was the children of Israel that carried the message that no human being is beyond hope. Ever. And those people who are written off by the rest of humanity as being agents of this three-letter agency, and agents of that three-letter agency, and agents of this three-letter organization, and this group, and that foundation, and so forth, that they themselves are not beyond hope. That you watching it right now are not beyond hope, and that you yourself are going to come to recognize this truth, and you yourself are going to become the biggest proponent of this, regardless of how long it takes your colleagues around you, your comrades and your colleagues, to come to see it themselves. You will take and say and speak and say and do without any hesitation, without any fear, and the message will reach every single human being. And that, my friends, is the redemption. That is the voice of Mashiach is telling us that this is how the world is going to look, and how it's going to transform, is that every single human being is going to become a wellspring, an unlimited wellspring of divine wisdom.